Managing and retaining records. Today I'm talking to Phill Bevan, a National Advisor in the vet sector. Records and retention is a huge area for RTOs to consider.
Records, as referred to in the Standards for RTOs 2015, means a written, printed or electronic document providing evidence that activities have been performed. I agree, the area of records and retention is huge for a regulated business such as RTOs. RTOs often think immediately about their general business records, or specifically for standards requirements, the obligation for RTOs to retain records of qualifications and statements of attainment issued for 30 years. This 30-year requirement is generally referring to the gathering and retention of full AVIT-MIS data, another area of some difficulty in RTOs with regular AVIT-MIS specification changes occurring in recent years. RTOs must retain sufficient data to be able to reissue a qualification or statement of attainment for the 30-year period, regardless of the storage method used. If the RTO ceases to operate, it is required to provide this information to its regulator in digital form. These requirements ensure that current and past learners are able to access records of their achievements. All learners who hold a verified unique student identifier, and those results have been reported into the USI system, will be able to access their records through the USI system in future.
Can you please provide an overview of records specifically in the learning and assessment resources context?
This is also a critical area of importance for RTO operations, but sometimes gets less attention than it should. RTOs that are offering courses via government support, whether it be course subsidies or student loan arrangements, seem to be more focused on records of learning and assessment activity, as these records underpin the payment of such government support. The National Centre for Vocational Education and Research has released guidelines on what constitutes valid records for RTOs for demonstrating student engagement in learning and assessment activities. Firstly, evidence of work submitted relating to engagement by a learner in a unit should be retained. The record of this work should include the learner name or ID, unit code and date completed. Trainer and assessor notes based on communication between the trainer and assessor and the learner might also be used, where the notes establish the learner's engagement in unit activities. These notes would again include learner name or ID, unit code, date, and the trainer or assessor's confirmation, such as their signature. For face-to-face attendance, an attendance record can be used, as long as it contains the trainer's name, signature, date, and unit code for the unit being delivered at the face-to-face event. For online or electronic delivery approaches, where a learner has a secure login to their learning activity for a unit in which they're enrolled, the login record demonstrating online engagement with the learning activity may be used. All of these factors have significant implications for how records are designed, gathered and retained for evidence purposes. For example, online learning management systems may need specific setup and reporting requirements, attendance records need particular fields completed, or learning resources in workshop or self-directed mode may require particular submission cover sheets with the required records information.
What about for assessment records?
The conduct of and recording of assessment activities remains one of the largest areas of focus for RTOs, with assessment repeatedly being raised in regulator reports and briefings as an area of high concern. NCVER has covered this area also, indicating that records must be either a secure paper-based or electronic record that indicates the actual result consistent with AVIT-MIS result outcomes, such as competent or recognition of prior learning granted. The record should also include the learner name or ID, unit code and date completed, and endorsement via an assessor name and signature. Most RTOs also consider ideally the student name and signature is also captured to confirm that the student has participated in and accepted the assessment outcome. ASQA has also provided additional guidance via a general direction in the area of retention requirements for completed student assessment items. ASQA considered completed student assessment items to be the actual pieces of work completed by a student or evidence of that work, including evidence collected for an RPL process. An assessor's completed marking guide, criteria and observation checklist for each student may be sufficient where it is not possible to retain the student's actual work. However, the retained evidence must have enough detail to demonstrate the assessor's judgment of the student's performance against the standard required. And strong guidance has also been provided regarding retention, with ASQA identifying that records must be securely retained. This means to retain records in a manner that safeguards them against unauthorised access, fire, flood, termites and other pests, and which ensures that copies of records can be produced if the originals are destroyed or inaccessible. Again, these records may be in hard copy or electronic format.
So how much of the student's assessment work is required to be retained?
ASQA requires RTOs to securely retain and be able to produce in full, at audit if requested to do so, all completed student assessment items for each student, as per the description above, for a period of 6 months from the date at which the judgment of competence for the student was made. That is on a unit-by-unit basis. This is very important as ASQA generally examines a sample of completed student assessment items at all audits except an initial registration audit. With all of the above, it is again important to note that there may be additional requirements for RTOs to gather and retain records for various government support obligations. For example, some state government subsidy programs require records retention for 2, 3 or even 5 years. So while an RTO may need to retain complete assessment records for a minimum of 6 months for ASQA, it has additional retention obligations in these other areas.
How does this impact assessment resource design?
It is important that high-quality assessment resources are employed by RTOs, not just meeting the standards for RTOs requirements for assessment, such as principles of assessment and rules of evidence, but that assessment documentation also meets all records documentation and retention requirements. High-quality resources, whether developed or purchased by RTOs, will cater for these records requirements and ensure that collection tools include fields required, such as dates, names, signatures, unit codes, AVIT-MIS compliant outcome results, and all other expectations.
So in summarising the area of record collection and retention, RTOs have specific requirements for their learning and assessment resources and activities to ensure that all activities are effectively recorded with all required information of how the activity occurred so that these may be provided as needed for various stakeholders and purposes in future.